Well, hello and good morning or good afternoon. Welcome to the Extended Disc 30-minute webinar. My name is Christina. I'm a senior trainer here at Extended Disc, and joining me today is my co-trainer, who happens also to be a certified executive coach, Wilma Stevens. Good morning, Wilma.
Hi, everybody.
So we're going to continue our discussion about coaching difficult people. There's so many facets to it, so we decided to just keep it as an ongoing session. Just before I start, again, if you missed any of it or you need to leave early or you have coworkers, just remember we'll record it and we'll post it on our website. And also, we love your questions. Just that during the session itself, we won't have time to answer them, but we will definitely follow up as soon as the webinar is over. So please continue just to go ahead and put your questions in the questions sections. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to let Wilma take it away, and let's go, Wilma.
Great. So today's session focuses on when you're actually in the debrief. We will do a quick little revisit of our last webinar on coaching difficult people using the assessment, where we focused on the preparation piece. So this webinar will talk about when we're actually in the coaching session. We all want to be good at coaching our difficult clients or coaching in those difficult moments. Remember, this is the exception, not the rule. Most often, we find that people love their disc style. They love learning about the most important person in their world, themselves. Occasionally, trouble in a session can show up. So as you listen to this webinar, Christina and I both hope that you hear something that will resonate with you, something that kind of helps you get through those little bumps in the session, the difficult exchanges, or just those difficult conversations that can come up surrounding the session. So we cannot state the importance of this enough. Breathe. The number one point when things get tough in your session, we would recommend that you remember a breath, not a gasp, just a deep breath that gets the oxygen back to your brain to tamp down that fight or flight response. That breathing piece helps you stay centered, you'll be relaxed. It helps you slow down a little bit when someone is pushing your buttons. Remember, we all want to respond in those situations, not react. So before we get started, everyone do a little practice. Take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And you can feel the physical response to that. So what makes a person difficult? That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? It depends. Really, what's difficult for one coach may not be difficult for the next. So ask yourself right now, what's your challenging client? So for me, I would say in a coaching session, and I'm going through the debrief, I sometimes find it challenging if I'm hit with just silence, no response, blank. I feel like that there's this wall, and that is logical for me because my behavioral style is I'm an IDS. I don't want to be ignored. I want some engagement. Christina, what for you is difficult?
I think the one that, well, there's two that drain energy from me, or I find more challenging. Same as with you, the quiet one. I can talk for hours, but I just don't feel like I get more energy when I have that interaction. The other one that is more challenging for me is probably the D style sometimes. They just, to remind myself just to go boom, 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 focus on the task, get it done. Those are probably the two more challenging ones for me.
Okay. Everyone has something, so nobody is excluded from that difficult piece. So one of the things could be, as Christina just pointed out, they could have a different behavioral style than you. Remember, don't think difficult exists only at certain levels of the organization. Your difficult client could show up anywhere from any level of the organization. So remember, for today, difficult coaching sessions can be anticipated. You know, that could be that toxic client that's going to come to your office, or toxic employee. Perhaps maybe you've heard rumors, or, you know, lots of dialogue. So you're anticipating, oh boy, how am I going to handle it? Or it can happen organically during the session. And I find when it kind of comes up, if I'm not well prepared, it can blindside me. You know, all of a sudden somebody is just boom. So that's where that happens. In our first difficult coaching difficult people, we really focused on preparation. Preparation is that key to success. By failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. That's a Benjamin Franklin quote, and I mean, that's got to resonate with us. So a couple of the points that we covered off there was, number one, understand the assessment tool. You don't want to be in front of your client fumbling with the pages, trying to figure out where it is. Make sure you know where to find the information, how to interpret the reports. If you're new to Extended Disc, remember, we have a great resource site in our VIP site. There are webinars, there are articles. It will shed some light on these areas. If you're brand new, we always recommend, and I know Christina recommends it, and I recommend it, do a practice round with someone before you do your first session live, that friendly co-worker. Okay, next point is make sure you're not the difficult one. We had a lot of feedback on this topic last time. Sometimes we don't realize that we can be the difficult one. Maybe there's a lack of adjustment on our part. Maybe we're feeling stressed. Maybe we're tired. Remember, your client or employee has not seen the burden of your day. They have not seen all the problems you faced. And in the same breath, I will tell you, you have not seen their day. So just make sure that you are not the difficult one.
I think also when we talk about difficult ones, we can at times autopilot because, you know, as coaches, in sessions, we tend to do things the same way because we do it well or it's easy for us. So we kind of get into that mode of thinking, oh, I'm successful at doing this way. I'm going to continue to do this way. But sometimes that gets us into trouble, or that makes us, again, the one that is more challenging in a session because we haven't made adjustments. We haven't prepared for the different styles of our own client. Wouldn't you say, Wilma?
I think that's a great point. We all can autopilot, especially if you're tired, right? End of the day, the autopilot kicks in, and then you don't recognize opportunities for yourself.
Exactly.
So that's a great point. Okay, next one we talked about was check your body language. We need to make sure that our body language is congruent with what we're saying. That has to run parallel to one another. Then set the stage for success. Remember, right time, right location. You know, you don't want to do it at the end of the day on a Friday when the World Series is on, or you don't want to, you don't want to do it in a cubicle. You need privacy. Remove the distractions. Make sure your phone is not on. Just make sure that you put those little things that are easy to control in place. And then the final point I just want to remind you of from the first session, and to me, one of the most important things is lose your judgment. This report holds no value judgments, so we really need to lose our judgments. Forget about the stories you know about the person, those preconceived notions, any rumors you've heard. Think empathy. Walk a mile in their shoes. Okay, so the big picture in a debriefing is to help your client or employee to gain some self-awareness. You want them to recognize the opportunities to modify their behaviors to improve their communication. Remember, the behavioral style of the person you are coaching works for them. That's why they have it. Well, I would say it works for them until it doesn't. And those aha moments of recognizing when it doesn't work and trying something else is, the journey that you're going to help them shine some light on that path. Now, we cannot underestimate setting up a DISC debriefing mindset. Remember, you know a lot about DISC. Your client coming in may not be as knowledgeable, so they may not be sure what this is all about. So name the game for success. Talk a little bit about what's going to happen. Christine and I came up with a list of things that we always try to cover before a session. We want them to know that this is a behavioral assessment. It reflects how they do what they do. It's based on the DISC model. It's not a test. We're not judging them. So there's no right or wrong answers. It's based on self-evaluation. That's such an important nuance. It's subtle but significant. So remember, you didn't answer the questions about your person. They answered the questions themselves. If they answered honestly, they didn't overthink it, they'll get a pretty accurate assessment. So the report will show who they actually are, not just who they think they need to be in their current work environment. That reflects an adjustment. When I look at a report, I cannot tell how smart they are because it doesn't measure intelligence, what their professional skills are, what their attitudes are. I can read a report. I will not know if that person is successful or not. I don't know what their values are. And also I would say it's not just a pretty picture report. It doesn't just go on and say all of the wonderful things. It also reflects areas of development. So I would say that this shows things we like to see about each other, about ourselves, and we probably recognize things that we may not be as delighted about ourselves, but we recognize. And then this whole big piece of items we don't recognize about ourselves. We don't know. We call them our blind spots. Anything else on that? Did I miss anything, Christina, on the debriefing mindset?
Nope, that's what I cover.
Great. Okay. So one of the advantages you have when coaching somebody is you have their report in front of them. That will help you understand their DISC style. So take a page from your own book. We all preach that continuously adjust. So now it's your chance, right? Think, how would this person like to be treated? By doing this, you're also showing some empathy. So we thought we would touch on 4 slides on some tips to keep in mind when you work with your client. A reminder, most people are blended styles, right? So each slide shows up. I would be speaking if they were 100%, but take into consideration your client. There are blended styles that will affect, ways to communicate with them. So if you are communicating with a D, remember, pick your pace up, get down to business, get to the point. They like logic. They're not wanting to be drowned in data, so don't overuse it. Act quickly, they decide fast. They will check out very quickly. One of the things you want to do is engage them in conversation because they like verbal recognition. So often, what do you think? Remember, a D's favorite question is what? They like to ask it, they like to answer it. And in the whole process, don't take their directness personally. Enjoy that, enjoy that response. So another thing to remember, what is the fear of a D? They do not want to lose control. So keep that in mind. If you are working with an I style, be friendly. Allow a little time for socialization. Have some fun. Remember, our eyes see the world in a positive light. I mean, the glass is not half full, it's overflowing. So take part enthusiastically. Like a D, an I will want a brisk pace. They're not famously great listeners. Ds are not famously great listeners either, unless what you're saying is what they want to hear. So make sure you continuously engage your I. They're often thinking about what they're going to say next as opposed to listening to you. Have some fun. Favorite question is who? Remember, their fear is feeling rejected. So in some ways, coaching an I is like coaching a soccer team. Your players need to know the coach likes them. So be a friendly coach.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, you get more out of your players if they believe the coach likes them. Okay, tips to communicate with an S style. Relax. Remember, an S will tend to be the listener, not the speaker. They'll be following you in a very logical fashion. It is so important to be your word. So what do I mean by that? With everybody, it's important to be our word, right? It speaks to our integrity. But do what you're going to say, like do what you're going to do. Like, I'm having a hard time spitting it out. Do what you say you're going to do. In other words, our S's are keeping notes. You make sure all of the follow-up you've talked about that you do. If they're nodding their head, don't think that this is an agreement. Frequently check in with them. Does this sound like you? What do you think? Their favorite question is how. So that means that's a question they like answered. And their fear is loss of stability. If they think this is going to bring on change, that could stress them out a little bit. So keep that in mind. C's, when we're coaching a C, C's like data and facts. They're into the details. So stay on task. You will not bore them with the details if they're interested. And remember, you are talking about them, so most likely they're interested. You don't need to socialize at that point. And control your own activity. They don't want you bouncing all over. They'd like a nicely organized debrief. Be patient. Slow down your pace. They probably will have a lot of questions. You'll start to notice that C's like to ask the question why. So they also like the answer to why. Stay out of their personal space. So have some space between them and you. Now, one of the things we can sometimes find is C's can get into the minutia, right? They can get a little lost in the weeds. And Christina and I always have a copy of the validity report, which you can find on our VIP site. We always keep that in case there's such an array of details that they want. That also helps them. It's an independent document proving the validity of the assessment. And remember, a C's fear is they do not like to be criticized. So keep that in mind. Anything, Christina, you'd like to add to that?
I just think the most important point is, again, that self-awareness. Here we are, here's the point where you said you really do need to practice what you preach. We need to identify the style of our own client, our own interaction, and we ourselves can only control our own modifications and adjustments. So I think that's a great point that you made. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so we just spoke about, tips when dealing with a D, I, S, or C. So I want to provide a little perspective. Now, firstly, I would just like to let you know that when Christina and I did a dry run yesterday, I had my slide of this up, and my dominant style is an I, and my little bubbles were all over place, and I hadn't even recognized that it wasn't in a circle until my friend Christina pointed that out. So I
I
changed the
actually
slide.
wanted her to leave it in because I thought it was so reflective of her eye style, but she has
A
totally
little.
cleaned up this slide. So it is
I
now a very systematic, perfect for C styles even.
Okay, so what this slide does for us is it gives us some perspective. Each one of these words is a characteristic trait that reflects the quadrant that it's in. I want to qualify this. We talk about D's as being competitive, and it's true. Our D friends are overtly competitive. Uh, but I will tell you, our I friends are competitive. Our S friends are competitive. Our C friends are competitive. Uh, but they will display this characteristic in a different fashion. Just like down here at the bottom, our SI here, we identify them here. They're helpful. Absolutely, they are helpful. But I promise you, C's can be helpful. D's can be helpful. So remember, when you're going through the reports, we want to remind you, don't pigeonhole your people. Uh, don't make value judgments. Don't let them use their behavioral style as an excuse for themselves or for others. And again, successful people show up all over the diamond. Nobody has the market cornered on success. Okay, we brainstormed some of the typical objections that you can receive, and so we're going to get into that section. Firstly, I want to talk about when a client or an employee has an objection. It's imperative that you take this seriously, that you demonstrate the humility and take their objection to heart. You need to put their needs first and listen to what they say. So pause, really listen. Remember, this objection that they have could represent their blind spot. So they may not recognize that in their behavior, but it might provide the greatest opportunity for you to make an impact on their performance. I always recognize that items that they agree with generally don't generate a lot of change in their behavior. It begs the question, what is the compelling reason to change it? And another little reminder, coaching can bring out emotions, right? Make sure you separate the person and the situation. So they may recognize it or not recognize it, but you could start to see some emotions bubbling up under the surface. Keep that in mind. Okay, so when somebody says, this is not me, or I'm not sure about this, the first thing that we need to say is, can I trust the results? So consider a doctor looking at an X-ray. They have to first validate the results. Yes, I can trust the results, or I'm not so sure. The same is the thing with extended disc. Now, one of the nice things about extended disc reports is it will not generate a report if the validity is not good. It kicks it out and it will produce what we call an invalid notice. And that means the person would have to take it again. So what we generally do, the extended disc reports have some validity indicators. I have an example down here. I automatically go back to the profiles. So this is a client of mine, and I just want to note, for you to note here. See how this profile is very nicely stretched out? One of the things that I know is that this person has responded very consistently. Now, if it was in really tight to this midline, not so stretched out, I might question, how strong the validity is. So people that are trained or people that have been certified on extended disc will be able to recognize these validity indicators. That we teach this in their training. For others, one of the things that we can make sure is we very, very clearly spell out, whether it's valid or not. So we take a lot of pride in this, that we produce results, that have clear validity. We know decisions are based on some of these reports. Now, Not all DISC reports are able to do this. So this is also one way we differentiate. But you need to make sure, can I trust the results? And that helps in your debriefing.
I would just like to also add that, you know, if you ever have a question about the results, how to interpret it, whether it's valid or whether you need to ask more questions, um, you can always just send the reports to Wilma or myself, and we're more than happy to take a look at it for you as well.
And actually, we love looking at reports. It's what we
We
do.
do.
It's a favorite part of the assessment. We like to look at the shape and, it speaks to us. So absolutely. If you're wondering, send it in. Okay, we've established the importance in listening. We know to be a great coach, you need to be a great listener, and you really need to listen like you mean it. And when things are not going well, you have to be even more tuned in to your client. Remember, people have to know that you've heard them. You can't be autopiloting. And if you're autopiloting when things are going really poorly, I would suggest the success or outcome in the end probably won't be as strong as you would like. So listen to what they're saying. I would like to point out our experience has been it's not always the first thing that comes out that's their concern or their objection. It's usually the second or the third item that's the real concern, that there's something in the report that they disagree with. So don't be too quick to jump in and fill the air. Listen. Listen to what their concerns are. Okay, so when we're handling objections, this is not me, I'm not sure about it, remind yourself right off the bat, you have no ownership like on what's written in the report. They answered the questions about themselves. If they answered honestly, they didn't overthink it, they'll get a pretty accurate report. What they probably are talking about, or it might be their blind spot, and remember, that's the greatest opportunity for you to have an impact. So when someone says, I'm not sure, I usually say, okay, I'm not sure either, but could this particular example show up in a new situation? Remember, consider that statement if it's true. Your client may consciously have worked on these areas of development and they don't recognize them, or in a new situation they're not recognizing it. If they're from the left-hand side of the model, they will need more time to absorb it. But we say the real litmus test on handling objection is to have them get some feedback on the statement. Now, generally, I always give an example and lead them to come up with someone they could ask. So I myself would say, I would ask my sisters because they would be very honest and they know me. I have trusted coworkers that I could ask, or a friend, perhaps a spouse or partner, that could give you feedback. You want to make sure that they're not going there to their direct reports to get feedback on their behavior, because the nature of being a direct report is, hey boss, you're terrific. You couldn't possibly, be like that. So make sure that you get that, because what happens is we can be blind to aspects of our behavior where everybody else sees it as clear as day. So do not do the heavy lifting here. Even if you know them well, get them to go out and get the response. If they come back and they say, hey, listen, I have asked everybody, and this particular point is not me. They can't corroborate that information. Disregard the statement. Remind them, no assessment can be 100% accurate every time. You want them to focus on the big picture. So say, thank you. Thank you for checking that out. I really appreciate it. What I want to remind you is that when you recognize your style not working, step outside of it, try something else, modify your behavior. Okay, so we all get some predictable responses. you know, when they say, what does this mean? We automatically put it back on them and we say, okay, well, what does this mean to you? Could you give me an example? Often they're like, not sure. Let them think about it. Don't answer that for them. You know, often in a group setting, I'll get this response. Oh, I would say this report is 90% right. This report is so great. Remember, as coaches, we step over nothing. To me, right off the bat, it begs the question, well, what about the other 10%? You know, I would say, well, tell me about the things that you don't think are you. Explore that a little bit. Ask them questions. Get them to get some feedback. Highlight things that they don't recognize with a yellow highlighter, and ask people that know them. I misunderstood the directions. Well, ask them, what do you mean? Maybe they did blow it. Maybe, you know, they didn't figure out those directions. Generally, to generate a report, remember, all 24 questions have to be answered. They can't skip a question, so they might say, well, I didn't answer all of them. If they didn't answer all of them, we will not generate a report. You need 100% completion. This is not the disc style I had before. How many times have you heard that? Christina?
A lot.
Right. So, a couple things here. Remember, nobody owns disc, right? There are all kinds of disc products out there. So your client may have taken a different disc assessment. Remember, a classic disc or a traditional disc product would measure conscious behavior. That's predicated on environment. Extended disc measures hardwired behavior, and that's much different, right? That's established when you become an adult, and it's pretty consistent, not rigid throughout your life. So when they say this is not the disc style I had before, remember, automatically check out the profiles. Make sure the validity is good. Look at validity indicators. I'm like this at home, and I'm so different at work. Well, generally, most of the time we operate in our comfort zone, right? One of these will represent an adjustment. When I answered the questions, I was thinking about blank, not work. It really doesn't matter. We suggest you focus on something, but remember this assessment is based on unconscious behavior. The algorithms and the questions all help us out with that. My job has created this response in me. You know, that's often said by someone who's not really happy in their job and feel, well, now that I'm, for instance, handling all these details, that's what's in front of me, and so I'm very detail focused. You know, talk to them about it. Everybody says I'm a D. Well, ask them. Explore this. What do they think? You know, what part of the D do they relate to? It doesn't mean they can't adjust as a D, and maybe they don't recognize that, you know, but you know, the part of the D, find out what part that they're really identifying with. If they disagree with that profile, look at the validity indicators. Okay, another one that we want to talk about is emotions during a debrief. You know, if they start to cry. If a person starts to cry, don't get flustered or frustrated when the tears come. Acknowledge that moment. Give them time to get their composure. If the tears come from an employee that doesn't normally cry or express that emotion, that may be a signal that something else is wrong. And I've had that experience. I worked with a client, a very senior female, the epitome of always together like a rock, and she started to cry in the debrief. I was so surprised. It completely took me off guard. And it really came out that it had nothing to do with what was in front of her. It was something else. Um, if someone yells or gets angry, it's easy to feel a little bit intimidated and kind of put you back on your heels. Um, don't choose that moment to give them a little bit of their own medicine. Like, stay calm, let them know that yelling is not constructive. If they're defensive, if you have Mr. or Mrs. Teflon in front of you, right? It's never their responsibility. It's not them. They use the blame game or excuses. If you have any concrete examples, that could be helpful. And then, of course, silence. If someone is silent, try to engage them. But remember, you can only control your own behavior. You cannot control theirs. In a debrief, especially a difficult debrief, you really need to watch your words. Consider the language that you use. We strongly recommend the obvious. Avoid language that is absolute or inflammatory. You don't want to talk about you always or every time, you must. You don't want to be shoulding people to death. You should do this, you should do that. So careful about your language. Then it means something.
I think body
Okay,
language
so
is important as well. Make sure your body language isn't such that corresponds with the should and the words that you just spoke about.
oh, absolutely, because your body language delivers a message too.
Absolutely.
So in the whole debrief, you need to manage your expectations. Remember, you can only control your behavior, so be your best, be prepared, demonstrate your humility, make sure you listen, and remember the person you are coaching is an expert on themselves. You can lead that horse to water, but it's up to them to embrace the self-awareness, to embrace the concept of modifying their behavior. And we always want to remind you, when things get tough, when that going gets tough, keep this in your back pocket. Breathe, stay centered, relax, slow down, don't react, respond. And if you have any questions about today's session, we would love to have them. I would like to say thank you for participating and thank you for joining us. Gina?
Thank you guys all for joining us. Again, it will be recorded if you missed any of it or want to share it with anybody. There is also the first session of the Difficult Client webinar recorded as well. Our next webinar will be on Wednesday, November 30th. Don't let success hold you back. Successful individuals often have even bigger challenges when it comes to making those adjustments. So how do we go about doing that? And I'll be joined by my boss, Marku Kaupinen, on that day. So we'll be sending out information on that as well. Thank you guys all for joining us and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks, Wilma.
Thank you, Christina, and thanks everybody. Have a great week.